Mom. Oh my God, Mom. The billionaire's cry tore through the storm-darkened dawn as he spotted her, his mother, barefoot and trembling by the dockside gate, held tightly in the arms of a thin black teenager wrapped in a worn-out blanket. Overwhelmed with shock and gratitude, he swore to help the boy rebuild his shattered life, never imagining that this single act of kindness would change his own forever. Before we dive in, where are you from? Drop a comment below and tell me, and don't forget to hype and subscribe for more heartwarming stories every day. Adrian Hale's hands gripped the steering wheel so hard his knuckles went white. The heated seats did nothing to warm the cold dread spreading through his chest. Adrian Hale was 42 years old. He'd built a medical robotics company from nothing, revolutionizing surgical equipment used in hospitals across the country. Forbes had called him a visionary. His colleagues called him brilliant. His late wife used to call him obsessive. Sarah had been gone for 3 years now. Cancer, fast and merciless. After she died, Adrian threw himself into work even harder. 18-hour days, sleeping in the lab, building machines that could save lives because he couldn't save hers. His mother Margaret, 72, had been diagnosed with vascular dementia 5 years ago. The symptoms had accelerated dramatically in the last 18 months. Some days she was sharp, remembering everything. Other days she thought Adrian was his father, dead now for a decade. She'd call him Richard and ask when dinner would be ready. Adrian had hired the best caregivers money could buy, installed a state-of-the-art security system, put a GPS tracker in the smartwatch she wore, the one she refused to take off because it had been Sarah's gift to her. Everything except what she actually needed him being there. Tonight proved it. The 3-story wooden house loomed against the stormy sky. Adrian had bought it 5 years ago because Margaret loved the ocean. She'd grown up in this coastal town, spent her summers on these beaches. He thought bringing her back here would help, thought the familiar setting would slow the disease. He was wrong. Adrian burst through the front door. Mom, Margaret. The house was silent except for the wind howling through the open back door. Papers scattered across the kitchen floor. A teacup sat half full on the counter, still warm. His phone buzzed. The GPS app. He pulled it up with shaking fingers. The tracking signal from Margaret's smartwatch showed a location near the Western Harbor area. The icon blinked weakly, the signal clearly degraded by the storm and the metal structures of the docks. The radius circle was huge. She could be anywhere within a quarter-mile area of the waterfront. No. Adrian grabbed a flashlight and ran into the night. 24 hours earlier, Gabriel Russo stood outside the harbor mission with $11 in his pocket and nowhere to go. The shelter was full. It was always full in winter when the coastal storms rolled in and the temperature dropped into the 30s. Gabriel had shown up at 5:30, thinking he'd have a chance. By the time he got to the front of the line, the director was already turning people away. Sorry son, the man said, not unkindly. We're at capacity. Try the warming center downtown. They might have space. Gabriel nodded and walked away. He didn't bother going to the warming center. He'd been there yesterday. They were full too. So Gabriel did what he'd been doing for the last 2 years he survived. Gabriel Russo was 17 years old. He'd been born in Arizona to Mexican immigrant parents who worked in agriculture. His father died in a field when Gabriel was 7. Heat stroke. His mother Rusa held the family together for 8 more years before immigration and customs enforcement came to their apartment building at dawn. Gabriel was 15 when they took his mother away. He'd been at school. His older brother Carlos, 17, had been homesick that day. When Gabriel got home, the apartment was empty. Neighbors told him what happened. Rusa had been deported to Tijuana. Carlos had run. Gabriel never saw either of them again. He tried to find Carlos, spent months searching. But his brother had vanished into the system, maybe deported too, maybe in custody somewhere, maybe dead. Gabriel didn't know. The not knowing was the worst part. Without parents, without documentation, without even proof he existed, Gabriel became invisible. He couldn't finish high school, couldn't get a legitimate job, couldn't rent an apartment, or open a bank account, or do any of the things that made life possible. So he survived in the margins. Day labor at the docks when the foreman didn't ask questions. Washing dishes for cash. sleeping in shelters or on beaches, or when he was desperate, in the doorways of closed shops. The only thing Gabriel owned that mattered was in his backpack, a cassette player that had belonged to his mother. It didn't work anymore. The batteries had died years ago, and he couldn't afford new ones. But he carried it everywhere because it was the last piece of her he had left. Sometimes he'd hold it and imagine he could hear her voice singing the old songs she used to play while cooking dinner. Gabriel had learned to read people quickly, to know who would help and who would hurt, to recognize the difference between kindness and pity, to understand that some people looked at him and saw a human being, while others looked at him and saw a problem to be solved or ignored. He'd also learned that the world was full of small cruelties. The restaurant manager who'd promised him cash work then called immigration when Gabriel showed up. The shelter volunteer who'd stolen the $20 Gabriel had saved for new shoes. The police officer who'd arrested him for sleeping on a park bench, held him overnight, then released him without charges or apology. But Gabriel had also seen kindness. The librarian who let him stay inside on cold days, pretending not to notice he was homeless. The dock worker who always gave him the heavier loads because they paid better. The elderly woman at the food bank who slipped him extra cans of soup and never asked questions. These small acts of compassion kept Gabriel's faith alive, kept him believing that people were fundamentally good, even when the world seemed designed to prove otherwise. On this particular night, with the storm coming in and no shelter available, Gabriel made his way toward the docks. There was an abandoned boat under the western pier. The hull was rotted through, but the cabin kept out most of the wind. It wasn't warm, but it was better than being completely exposed. He walked through the wealthy part of town on his way to the waterfront. The big houses with their lit windows and warm fires, families inside, safe and together. Gabriel kept his head down. He'd learned early that being young and brown in rich white neighborhoods attracted attention he couldn't afford. That's when he heard it. Crying. Confused, frightened crying. An elderly person's voice, thin and wavering in the wind. Every instinct told Gabriel to keep walking. Getting involved with other people's problems when you looked like he did, when you had no papers and no home, was dangerous. It was the kind of thing that got you arrested for being in the wrong place at the wrong time. But the crying continued, lost, desperate. Gabriel thought about his mother, about how she'd been alone and scared when they took her away, about how he wished someone had helped her. He followed the sound. Margaret Hale stood on the sandy path between two beach houses, wearing only her nightgown and slippers. Her silver hair hung loose around her face. She was crying softly, clutching something to her chest. "Ma'am," Gabriel called out gently, approaching slowly. "Are you okay?" The woman turned to him. Her eyes were clouded, unfocused. "Richard," she said, her voice trembling. "He's waiting, harbor." Gabriel's heart sank. He recognized the signs. His grandmother had been the same way before she died when he was 10. Dementia. This woman was having an episode. "What's your name, ma'am?" Gabriel asked, keeping his voice calm and gentle. "Margaret." She clutched the object tighter. Gabriel could see now, it was a photograph in a silver frame. A wedding picture maybe 40 years old. "I need find Richard, he'll be worried." Gabriel looked around. They were between two massive beach houses. No one else was on the path. Darkness was falling fast. The storm was picking up. Margaret was wearing only a thin nightgown. Her bare feet were already red from the cold sand. "Margaret, do you know where you live? Can you tell me your address?" Margaret's face crumpled. "I can't remember." She started crying harder.
"Why can't I?"
Gabriel felt panic rising in his chest. This woman needed help. Needed to get home, needed medical attention. He should call 911. That was the smart thing, the safe thing. But Gabriel had learned not to trust the police, had learned that when you were homeless and Latino, interactions with law enforcement rarely went well. And if they found him here with a confused elderly white woman who couldn't explain who he was or why he was helping her, they'd see what they always saw, a young Latino man and a victim. They wouldn't ask questions, they'd arrest first. Gabriel couldn't risk it, but he also couldn't leave her. The memory of his mother's last words haunted him. She'd been in the detention center, speaking to him through a phone with thick glass between them. "Be kind, Mesho," she'd said, tears streaming down her face. "No matter what happens to me, no matter how hard life gets, promise me you'll stay kind. That's the only thing they can never take from you. Gabriel had promised, and he'd kept that promise through 2 years of hell. He wasn't going to break it now. Okay, Gabriel said, making a decision. Okay, Margaret, let's figure this out together. Let's walk around and see if anything looks familiar. Maybe we can find your house. Margaret nodded, seeming relieved to have someone else take charge. Gabriel offered his arm, and she took it, leaning on him heavily. They walked slowly through the neighborhood. Margaret talked as they went, her conversation wandering through time, mixing past and present, confusing names and places. Richard works so hard, she said. Always at the office. I tell him he needs to rest and Adrian, our boy, he's the same way. So stubborn. I'm sure they worry about you, Gabriel said, trying to keep her calm, trying to think of what to do. The temperature was dropping fast. Full darkness had settled over the neighborhood. Street lights came on, casting long shadows. Gabriel's thin jacket did nothing against the cold. Margaret's nightgown was even thinner. I'm cold, Margaret said, shivering. Gabriel stopped walking. He looked at Margaret, at her bare legs and thin slippers, at the way she shook with cold and confusion. He looked at the darkening sky, and the houses around them, all locked up tight behind their gates and walls. Then Gabriel made a decision that would change his life forever. He took off his jacket, his only protection against the cold, and he wrapped it around Margaret's shoulders. There, Gabriel said, trying to sound confident, even though he was already starting to shiver. That's better, right? Margaret looked at him with eyes that suddenly focused, becoming clear for just a moment. You gave me your coat, she said wonderingly. But now I'll be okay.
Gabriel lied. I'm tougher than I look.
They continued walking, Gabriel trying each gate they passed, hoping to recognize Margaret's house. But the street remained empty. These wealthy neighborhoods were like ghost towns at night. Everyone locked away in their mansions, insulated from the cold and the world. After 20 minutes, Margaret's legs began to give out. She stumbled and Gabriel caught her, supporting her weight. I'm so tired, Margaret whispered. Can we rest? Gabriel looked around desperately. The wind was picking up, carrying the salt spray from the ocean. The storm was getting worse. They were standing near a wooden pier that jutted out into the harbor. Fishing boats bobbed in the choppy water. Underneath the pier, Gabriel could see the dark shape of an abandoned boat he sometimes used for shelter. Okay, Gabriel said, let's rest. Just for a few minutes. He helped Margaret down the sandy embankment to the pier. The old boat was there, half in the water, its hull rotted through but its small cabin still intact. Gabriel helped Margaret climb onto the deck and into the cabin, out of the worst of the wind.
Is this a boat?
Margaret asked, looking around with confusion. Yes, ma'am. We're just resting here until the storm passes. Then we'll find your house. Margaret nodded, too tired to question further. She sat down on an old bench built into the cabin wall. Gabriel sat beside her, already shivering violently without his jacket. He pulled his backpack around and dug through it with numb fingers. At the bottom, wrapped in plastic, was a denim blanket that had belonged to his brother Carlos. It was the only thing Gabriel had left of him. Thin, worn, full of holes, but it had been Carlos. Gabriel had sworn he'd never give this blanket away. It was all he had left of his family. But looking at Margaret, shivering and confused and so fragile, Gabriel knew what he had to do. He pulled out the blanket and wrapped it around both of them, pulling Margaret close to his side. She was so small, so frail. Her body shook against his. What's this? Margaret asked, touching the blanket. It was my brother's, Gabriel said. He's gone now. But I think he'd want me to use it to help someone. Oh, Margaret said softly. Then you shouldn't waste it on me. It's not wasted, Gabriel said firmly. My mom always taught me to take care of people. She believed in kindness above everything.
She sounds like
a good woman, Margaret murmured. She was the best, Gabriel whispered. The temperature continued to drop. The wind howled around the cabin. Waves lapped at the hull of the boat, rocking it gently. Gabriel tried to remember everything he'd learned about surviving cold nights. Keep moving to maintain circulation. Don't fall asleep. Stay awake no matter what. Share body heat. But this was different. This was dangerous cold, deadly cold, and he had no real shelter, no protection, and a confused elderly woman who depended on him. Tell me about your family, Margaret said after a while, her voice weak but curious. So Gabriel talked. He told Margaret about his mother's laugh, which was loud and joyful and could light up a room. About how she sang while she cooked, even though she couldn't carry a tune. About how she worked 3 jobs to keep them fed and housed, but always made time to help him with homework, to ask about his day, to show him he mattered. He told her about his father, the man he barely remembered but whose shadow shaped his childhood. About how he died working in the fields, how the foreman refused to call an ambulance because it would slow down production, how he collapsed and never got up. He told her about Carlos, his brother, his protector, his best friend. How Carlos had taught him to tie his shoes and ride a bike and stand up to bullies. How Carlos had promised to take care of him after their mother was deported. How Carlos had vanished before he could keep that promise. My whole family is gone, Gabriel said quietly. Scattered or dead or lost. For 2 years I've been completely alone. No one to call when things get hard. No one who knows my birthday or remembers what I was like as a kid. No one. Margaret's hand found his in the darkness and squeezed. You're not alone right now, she said. I'm here. You are. Gabriel agreed, squeezing back. And I'm not leaving you.
We're getting through this together.
Wonderful, Margaret said, her mind drifting back to his mother. She sounds wonderful. She was, Gabriel said, she taught me that being poor doesn't mean being unkind. That you can lose everything material and still be rich if you have a good heart. She was right, Margaret said, then her eyes drifted, losing focus again. Is Richard coming? He's supposed to. He'll be here soon, Gabriel said, even though he was beginning to suspect Richard was gone, like his own mother was gone. The hours crawled by. 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock. Gabriel talked continuously, telling Margaret stories, asking her questions, anything to keep her awake. She drifted in and out of lucidity, sometimes calling him Adrian, sometimes asking for her husband, sometimes clear and present. During one clear moment around 11, Margaret looked at Gabriel with focused eyes. You're freezing, she said, her voice sharp with concern. You're going to die out here. No, I'm not, Gabriel said, though his body had stopped shivering, which he knew was a very bad sign. We're going to make it through the night, both of us. Why are you doing this? Margaret asked. You don't even know me, you could leave. Gabriel thought about that, thought about his mother's words, thought about the promise he'd made to stay kind even when the world wasn't kind back. Because someone needed help, Gabriel said simply. And I was there. That's reason enough. Margaret reached out with a shaking hand and touched his face. Your mother raised you right, she whispered. She'd be so proud. Gabriel felt tears freeze on his cheeks. By 11:30, Gabriel was losing his fight against hypothermia. His thoughts were scattered and confused, his vision blurred, his body felt heavy and distant, like it belonged to someone else. But he kept his arms around Margaret, kept the blanket wrapped around them both, kept his body between her and the worst of the cold. Gabriel, Margaret's voice seemed to come from very far away.
Are you still there?
Still here, Gabriel mumbled, forcing the words through numb lips. I'm not going anywhere. Don't leave me, Margaret said, and she sounded scared, like a child. Please don't leave me alone. Never, Gabriel promised. I'm not anywhere. Around midnight, Gabriel stopped being able to feel his hands or feet. His core temperature had dropped dangerously low. He knew, in the part of his brain that could still think clearly, that he was dying. But Margaret was still alive, still breathing, still warm against his body. That was enough. That had to be enough. Gabriel thought about his mother, about her smile and her laugh, and the way she used to tuck him in at night, when he was small. He thought about what she'd said about staying kind, even when the world wasn't kind back. I kept my promise, Mom, Gabriel whispered into the darkness. I stayed kind, right to the end. Margaret stirred against him. Who are you? My mother, Gabriel said, his words slurring. Telling her, I love her. Tell mine, I love her too, Margaret said, her voice dreamy. And my Richard, and my Adrian. Tell them, all I love them. I will, Gabriel promised, even though he was pretty sure they were both going to die here. Frozen under this pier, two lost souls who'd found each other at the end. The storm intensified around 1 in the morning. Rain began to fall, heavy and cold, driven sideways by the wind. It soaked through the gaps in the cabin walls. Gabriel's consciousness faded in and out. One moment he was aware of the cold, and Margaret's weight against him. The next moment he was somewhere warm, somewhere safe, and his mother was there, smiling at him, telling him everything would be okay. Just a little longer, Gabriel told himself when he came back to awareness. Just hold on. But he didn't know if Margaret's son was even coming. Didn't know if anyone would find them. Didn't know if he'd wake up again, or if the next time he closed his eyes would be the last time. All he knew was that he wasn't going to let go, wasn't going to leave Margaret alone, wasn't going to break his promise to stay. Meanwhile, Adrian was running through the storm, his flashlight cutting through sheets of rain. The GPS had brought him to the harbor area, but the signal was useless now, bouncing off metal structures, degraded by the storm, showing Margaret somewhere in a quarter-mile radius. He ran down the pier, shouting her name into the wind. Mom, Margaret, nothing but the howl of the storm, and the crash of waves. Adrian's mind raced through worst-case scenarios. She could have fallen into the water, could be lying injured somewhere, could be no, he couldn't think like that. He ran along the waterfront, checking between boats, under tarps, anywhere an elderly woman might have sought shelter or collapsed. His clothes were soaked through, his hands were numb, but he didn't stop. Margaret, he screamed again, and then faintly, he thought he heard something. Not a voice, but movement. The creak of wood. He turned his flashlight toward the sound. There, under the western pier, was an old abandoned fishing boat, half submerged, clearly derelict. Something made him run toward it. At 4:12 in the morning, headlights swept across the pier. Gabriel tried to open his eyes, but they felt frozen shut. He heard a car door slam, heard footsteps running, heard someone screaming, "Mom, oh my God, Mom." Gabriel forced his eyes open, just barely. A man was running toward the boat, tall, wearing an expensive coat, his face twisted with horror and fear. This must be Margaret's son, Adrian. Gabriel tried to speak, tried to explain, but his voice wouldn't work. He gathered every bit of strength he had left, and pushed the words out. "She was lost," Gabriel whispered. "I couldn't leave her," and then everything went dark. Gabriel woke up to warmth, real deep, penetrating warmth, that hurt almost as much as the cold had. He was in a bed with heavy blankets. An IV dripped slowly into his arm. Monitors beeped steadily beside him. Hospital. A nurse appeared in his field of vision, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and gentle hands. "Welcome back," she said softly. "You gave us quite a scare, young man." "Margaret," Gabriel croaked, his throat raw. "Is she Mrs. Hale is fine," the nurse said smiling. "Mild hypothermia and pneumonia, but she's going to be perfectly okay. Thanks to you." Her eyes filled with tears. "You saved her life, sweetheart. You almost died doing it, but you saved her life. Your body heat kept her core temperature barely above fatal levels. Another hour, and she didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to." Gabriel felt something release in his chest. She was alive. Margaret was alive. That was all that mattered. "How long?" Gabriel asked. "You've been here for about 6 hours," the nurse said. "Your core temperature was down to 90 degrees when you came in. Another hour and again she didn't finish." The door opened and a man walked in, the same man from the pier, Margaret's son. Up close, Adrian Hale looked younger than Gabriel had thought, maybe early 40s, with dark hair going gray at the temples and eyes red from crying, or exhaustion or both. Behind him stood 2 police officers, a man and a woman, both in uniform. Gabriel's stomach tightened. Here it came. The questions, the suspicion, the assumption that he must have done something wrong. The woman stepped forward. She was black, maybe in her 50s, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. "I'm Detective Patricia Moore," she said, "and this is Officer James Carter. We need to understand what happened last night. You're not in trouble yet, but we have questions." Gabriel sat up slowly, wincing at the ache in his ribs. He had nothing to hide. "I was walking last evening," he began, his voice hoarse. "I'd been turned away from the shelter, had nowhere to go. I was heading toward the pier to find a place out of the wind. Just after sunset, around 6:30, I heard someone crying. I found Mrs. Hale near the beach access path between two houses, confused, barefoot, wearing only a nightgown. She was holding a picture frame, her wedding photo. Adrian's breath caught in his throat. She said she needed to find her husband Richard, that he was waiting at the harbor, Gabriel continued. She didn't know where she lived, couldn't remember her address. She was freezing and her feet were bare, so I gave her my jacket. I took her wedding picture and put it in my backpack so she wouldn't drop it. You gave her your only jacket? Adrian asked quietly, looking at Gabriel with an expression he couldn't quite read. Gabriel nodded. Yes, sir. She needed it more than I did. We tried to find her home. I walked her through the neighborhood, tried different gates, but she couldn't remember which house it was. It was getting dark, getting colder. She was exhausted and could barely walk. So I took her to the old boat under the pier, out of the wind, and we sat down to rest. For 5 hours, Adrian said softly. You sat there for 5 hours in freezing weather? Yes, sir, Gabriel replied. I gave her my brother's blanket. It's all I had left of him. I just wanted to keep Mrs. Hale warm, keep her talking so she wouldn't fall asleep. I knew falling asleep in that cold was dangerous. Detective Moore scribbled notes, her expression unreadable. She never gave you her address, her phone number, anything we can verify? No, ma'am. She kept asking for her husband, talking about her son, but she couldn't remember home. Her mind was confused. She'd be clear for a moment, then lost again. Why didn't you call for help? Officer Carter asked, his tone carrying an edge of suspicion. You had 5 hours, you could have called 911 at any point. Gabriel hesitated. The answer lived deep inside him, buried under years of watching how the world really worked. He swallowed hard, choosing his words carefully. Because I've seen what happens when people like me try to help, Gabriel said quietly. When brown kids get involved. Adrian frowned. What do you mean? Gabriel's eyes drifted to the window. The rain outside blurred into memory. He was 15 again, standing under a flickering streetlight in Phoenix. A woman had collapsed on the sidewalk, drunk or sick. Gabriel had run to her, shaking her shoulder, calling for help. By the time the police arrived, people were pointing at him, shouting that he tried to rob her. They saw a skinny Latino kid kneeling over a white woman with her purse on the ground, and that was enough. I tried to help someone once, Gabriel said quietly. A woman who'd collapsed. I called for help, stayed with her. When the police came, they handcuffed me first, didn't ask questions, didn't listen. They saw what they wanted to see. It took the woman waking up and telling them I didn't touch her before they let me go. No apology, just, let me go. He looked back at them now. So when I found her, Mrs. Hale, I thought if I called, if the police came and saw me with an old white lady in her nightgown, confused, unable to explain, they'd assume the worst. I didn't want to make things worse for her. Or for me. His voice cracked. I just wanted to keep her safe until someone found us. I thought maybe her family was looking for her. I thought if I could just keep her alive until morning. Detective Moore's pen stilled. Officer Carter shifted uncomfortably. Adrian's face softened, his jaw trembling. My God, Adrian whispered, turning away for a moment. Moore cleared her throat. We'll need to verify your story. We found your fingerprints on Mrs. Hale's smartwatch, on her wedding photo frame, on the blanket. Can you explain that? I told you. I put the photo in my backpack so she wouldn't drop it or lose it in the dark. The watch, she was wearing it on her wrist. I must have touched it when I was trying to keep her warm, when I was checking. I don't know, checking if she was still breathing, still alive. When exactly did you first encounter Mrs. Hale? Officer Carter asked, pulling out his own notepad. Around 6:30, maybe closer to 7. It was just getting dark, and you stayed with her until approximately 4 in the morning, when Mr. Hale found you. Yes, sir, that's almost 9 hours, Carter said, his tone skeptical. 5 hours in the boat, Gabriel corrected. We walked around for maybe an hour before that, trying to find her house. Then we were in the boat from around 8 o'clock until Mr. Hale found us. That's still a long time to stay with someone you don't know, Carter said. Most people would have called for help. Most people would have left. Most people aren't worried about getting arrested for helping. Gabriel shot back with more heat than he intended. Then softer, she needed someone. I couldn't leave her alone, not in that cold, not that confused. She would have died. Detective Moore exchanged a glance with Carter. We're going to need you to come down to the station for formal questioning. There are some details we need to verify, and we need to run your information through our system." Gabriel's heart sank. "Am I under arrest?" "Not yet," Moore said carefully. "But you're not free to leave either. This is a serious situation. An elderly woman with dementia, a minor who's homeless with no identification. We need to establish the full timeline and make sure everything checks out." Adrian stepped forward. "Wait. You can't seriously think Gabriel did anything wrong. He saved my mother's life." "Mr. Hale," Moore interrupted, her voice firm. "I understand your mother is safe, and I'm glad. But we have procedures. A 17-year-old homeless boy was found with your elderly mother, who has dementia, after she'd been missing for hours in a storm. We need to establish exactly what happened, verify his story, check for any prior incidents. This is standard protocol." "This is ridiculous," Adrian said, his voice rising. "He nearly died saving her. Look at him, he's got hypothermia, he's weak, he gave her everything he had." "Which we'll take into account," Moore said. "But we still need to follow procedure. I'm sure you understand." Adrian looked like he wanted to argue more, but he clenched his jaw and nodded stiffly. Gabriel felt the familiar weight of suspicion settling over him. This was how it always went. Guilty until proven innocent, helpful until proven not a threat. "I want a lawyer," Gabriel said quietly, remembering advice his brother had once given him. "If the police ever question you, ask for a lawyer. Don't say anything else." "Smart kid," Moore said, something almost like approval in her voice. "We'll arrange for a public defender. In the meantime, you're coming with us. Doctor says you're stable enough to be discharged into custody." "Custody," Adrian said sharply. "Protective custody," Moore clarified. "He's a minor, homeless, no guardian. We can't just release him onto the street, Mr. Hale. This is for his safety as much as anything else." Gabriel stood on shaky legs, still weak from the hypothermia. A uniformed officer stepped forward with a wheelchair, but Gabriel waved it away. He'd walk out of here on his own feet. He'd done nothing wrong. As they led him out, Gabriel caught Adrian's eye. The older man looked stricken, helpless, angry at a system he'd probably never had to navigate before. "I'll get you out," Adrian promised. "I'll fix this." Gabriel wanted to believe him, but he'd learned not to count on promises from people he'd just met, no matter how sincere they seemed. The police station was cold and institutional. Gray walls, fluorescent lights, the smell of old coffee and industrial cleaner. Gabriel sat in an interrogation room, not a cell, they were careful to point out, just a room for what felt like hours while they processed him. They took his fingerprints, swabbed his cheek for DNA, photographed him from multiple angles, went through his backpack, cataloging every item, the broken cassette player, the wedding photo in its silver frame, the thin blanket, a few pieces of clothing, $11 in crumpled bills. "Is this everything you own?" the processing officer asked, not unkindly. Gabriel nodded. "Jesus," the officer muttered, carefully placing items back in the bag. A public defender arrived around noon, a harried woman in her 30s named Lisa Chen, who looked like she hadn't slept in days and was juggling too many cases. "Gabriel Russo," she said, sitting down across from him in the interrogation room. She opened a folder and scanned the preliminary report. "Okay, here's where we are. They don't have anything concrete on you, Mrs. Hale's medical records confirm severe hypothermia consistent with prolonged cold exposure. The hospital confirmed your core temperature was life-threateningly low when you were brought in. Mr. Hale's GPS data shows his mother was in the harbor area where he found you. Everything so far supports your version of events. Then why am I still here?" Gabriel asked, exhaustion making his voice flat. Lisa sighed. "Because you're young, Latino, homeless, and were found with a wealthy elderly white woman who has dementia. They want to make absolutely sure there's no exploitation, no theft, no harm. They're being thorough." "Thorough," Gabriel repeated bitterly. "Is that what we're calling it?" Lisa's expression softened. "I know it's not fair. I know this is," she gestured vaguely at the room, "the situation. I know it's wrong, but this is the system we're working with. The good news is they've been calling the hospitals and shelters you mentioned. The harbor mission confirmed you were turned away yesterday evening. The warming center confirmed the same. They're building a timeline that matches your story." "How long?" Gabriel asked. Couple more hours probably. They want to interview Mrs. Hale. When she's more alert, get her version. Once that confirms your account, they'll have to let you go. Gabriel slumped in his chair. A couple more hours. He could survive a couple more hours. He'd survived worse. Lisa stood to leave, then paused. For what it's worth, what you did, staying with that woman all night, giving her your jacket and blanket, nearly dying to keep her alive. That took real courage, real compassion. Don't let them make you feel like a criminal for being a good person. After she left, Gabriel sat alone in the interrogation room, staring at the two-way mirror and wondering who was watching him, what they were thinking. Another 2 hours passed. Then Detective Moore came in, with Officer Carter behind her. Mrs. Hale is awake, Moore said, sitting down. We just spoke with her. Gabriel's heart hammered. This was it. Either Margaret would confirm his story, or the confusion of her dementia would make everything worse. She remembers you, Moore continued. Not clearly, her memory is fragmented, but she remembers being cold and lost. She remembers a young man who gave her his coat. She remembers sitting in a boat, being wrapped in a blanket, someone talking to her to keep her awake. Moore's expression shifted, something almost like respect crossing her face. She called you her guardian angel. Gabriel felt his throat tighten. She also confirmed that she has vascular dementia, Moore went on, that she wanders sometimes, that she can't always remember where she is or who people are. Her son confirmed the same. The back door lock at their house malfunctioned. He'd been meaning to fix it for weeks. She walked out during the storm, and the caregiver on duty didn't notice immediately. Moore closed her folder. Your story checks out, Gabriel, every part of it. The timeline, the location, the condition you were both found in, it all matches. You're free to go. Gabriel stood on shaky legs. Just like that, Moore said. Then she did something unexpected. She extended her hand. The report will reflect that you saved Mrs. Hale's life. What you did, staying with her for 5 hours in freezing weather, keeping her alive with your own body heat, giving up everything you had to protect her. That's real heroism. Not many people would do that, especially not in your situation. Gabriel shook her hand, too overwhelmed to speak. One more thing, Moore added. Mr. Hale has been waiting in the lobby since we brought you in. 7 hours. He refused to leave until you were released. Gabriel walked into the lobby to find Adrian Hale, pacing like a caged animal. When he saw Gabriel, he immediately strode over. Are you okay? Adrian asked. Did they treat you all right? I swear to God if they— I'm fine, Gabriel said. They let me go. Everything's fine. Adrian looked like he wanted to argue with the very concept of fine, but he just nodded. Come on, let's get you out of here. They walked to Adrian's car in silence. The storm had passed, leaving the streets wet and gleaming in the afternoon sun. Everything looked washed clean. Once they were in the car, Adrian didn't start the engine right away. He just sat there, hands on the steering wheel, staring straight ahead. I'm sorry, he said finally. For what? Gabriel asked. For what they put you through. The suspicion, the interrogation, treating you like a criminal when you saved my mother's life. His voice cracked. It's not right, it's how things work, Gabriel said quietly. When you look like me and have nothing. Adrian turned to face him. It shouldn't be, and I'm going to make sure something good comes from this. Do you have somewhere to go right now? Gabriel shook his head. The shelter maybe, if they have space tonight. No, Adrian said firmly. You're coming home with me, Mr. Hale. Adrian. Call me Adrian. Adrian, Gabriel tried. You don't have to do this. I'm okay. I'll figure something out. You almost died saving my mother, Adrian said, his voice intense. You gave her your jacket, your blanket, the only things you had. You sat with her for 5 hours in weather that nearly killed you both. And when I asked the nurse what condition you were in, she said 5 more minutes and you would have been gone. 5 minutes. He took a shaky breath. My mother has vascular dementia. She was diagnosed 5 years ago. The symptoms have accelerated over the last 18 months. I hired caregivers, installed security systems, put a GPS tracker in her smartwatch. But I was 3 hours away, working late, when she wandered out. I'd been meaning to fix that back door lock for weeks. I was too busy, too focused on work. Adrian's eyes filled with tears. She could have died, Gabriel, and it would have been my fault. because I was too busy building things to notice I was losing the people that mattered. But she didn't die, because you were there, because you chose to stay, to help, to sacrifice everything for a stranger. He wiped his eyes. So when I say you're coming home with me, I mean it. I have a studio apartment above the workshop behind my house. It's yours. Warm, safe, private. You can stay there until you get back on your feet, or longer if you need. This isn't charity. This is me trying to do something right for once. Gabriel stared at him. Why? Because you deserve it, Adrian said simply. Because someone who gives everything they have for someone else deserves to have someone give something back. Because I look at you and I see who I should have been, who I should be. The rain had stopped. Through the car windows, Gabriel could see the first light breaking through the clouds, casting long shadows across the wet streets. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Gabriel felt something unfamiliar stir inside him. Hope. Okay, Gabriel said quietly. Okay, thank you. Adrian started the car. Let's go home. When Gabriel walked into the Hale house for the first time, he stopped in the doorway, overwhelmed. The 3-story wooden structure overlooked the harbor, painted soft gray with white trim. Not a mansion exactly, but substantial. The kind of place that looked like a home, not a showpiece. Inside, hardwood floors worn smooth by years of footsteps stretched in every direction. Bookshelves lined the walls stuffed with volumes on everything from robotics to poetry. Photographs covered every surface, Margaret and Richard young and in love, Adrian as a child with gap-toothed grin, Adrian's late wife Sarah smiling on a beach somewhere, her hair wild in the wind. The house smelled like coffee and old books, and the faint scent of the ocean drifting through open windows. I know it's a lot, Adrian said, noticing Gabriel's expression. The house is probably bigger than you need, but the studio apartment is separate, above the workshop. You'll have your own space, your own entrance, privacy. He led Gabriel through the house and out the back door. Behind the main structure was a large workshop, more like a small warehouse, filled with equipment Gabriel didn't recognize: robotic arms, computer monitors, circuit boards, complex machinery that looked like it belonged in a science fiction movie. This is where I work, Adrian explained. Medical robotics. I develop surgical equipment that helps doctors perform more precise procedures. Above the workshop, accessible by an external staircase, was a small apartment. Adrian unlocked the door and gestured Gabriel inside. The space was modest but clean. A main room with a kitchenette, a small bedroom, a bathroom. Large windows overlooked the harbor. The furniture was simple but comfortable. A couch, a table, a bed with what looked like very soft blankets. It's not much, Adrian said, but it's warm and safe. It's perfect, Gabriel whispered. He'd never had his own room, his own space. Even before he was homeless, he'd shared a tiny bedroom with Carlos. The kitchen is stocked with basics, Adrian continued. But you're welcome to eat with us, with me and my mother, in the main house. In fact, I'd prefer it. Margaret loves company. How is she? Gabriel asked. Recovering. She'll be in the hospital for a few more days until the pneumonia clears. But she's going to be okay, because of you. Gabriel didn't know what to say to that, so he said nothing. Listen, Adrian said. I know this is a lot. I know we just met under the worst possible circumstances, and I know you've probably learned not to trust people, especially people who make big promises. So I'm not going to make you any promises except this one. You're safe here, for as long as you need. No strings, no expectations, just a warm place to sleep and food to eat, and time to figure out what comes next. He paused. Is that okay? Gabriel nodded, not trusting his voice. Good, Adrian said. Get some rest. We'll talk more tomorrow. The first week was the hardest. Gabriel kept waiting for the other shoe to drop, for Adrian to change his mind, for someone to realize this was all a mistake, for the police to come back with more questions. He barely touched anything in the studio apartment, made his bed every morning with military precision, hospital corners tight enough to bounce a quarter. He ate sparingly at meals, afraid of taking too much, of being a burden. He moved through the house like a ghost, trying not to disturb anything, trying not to leave a mark. On the 5th day, Adrian found him in the workshop. Gabriel was standing in the doorway, afraid to enter, just looking at all the equipment with wide eyes. "Gabriel," Adrian said, coming to stand beside him. "We need to talk." Gabriel's heart sank. Here it came. The dismissal. The realization that this had been a mistake. "This isn't working," Adrian continued. Gabriel nodded, trying not to cry. "I understand I can be packed in 5 minutes. I won't." "What?" Adrian interrupted, looking confused. "No, that's not what I meant." Gabriel stopped. "It's not." "No," Adrian said firmly. "I mean you being afraid to live here isn't working. You're tiptoeing around like you're going to be kicked out at any moment. Like you're a guest who's overstayed their welcome. I don't want you to feel that way." He gestured to the workshop. "This is my life's work. 20 years of research and development, medical robotics, surgical equipment that saves lives, patents worth millions, equipment that costs more than most people make in a year." Adrian walked into the workshop and picked up a circuit board, examining it. "My wife used to say I loved my machines more than I loved her." She was joking, but there was truth in it. "I was always here, always working, always building the next thing. And I missed so much. So many dinners, so many conversations, so much time I can never get back." He set the board down and looked at Gabriel. "When Sarah died, I promised myself I'd be more present for my mother. But I wasn't. I hired people to take care of her and threw myself back into work. And while I was 3 hours away at a research facility, she nearly died. You know what I realized that night, when I found you both under that pier?" Gabriel shook his head. "That all of this," Adrian gestured around the workshop, "is just stuff, just machines. What matters is people. You taught me that. A 17-year-old kid who had nothing taught me what really matters." He met Gabriel's eyes. "So starting today things change, for both of us. I'm going to teach you if you want to learn. Robotics, programming, engineering, whatever interests you, and in return, you help me remember to leave this workshop before midnight. You help me have dinner with my mother. You help me be present." He smiled. "Deal." Gabriel felt tears streaming down his face. "Deal." After that conversation, everything shifted. Gabriel started exploring the workshop, asking questions about the equipment, the projects, the dreams Adrian was building. Adrian was a patient teacher, breaking down complex concepts into understandable pieces, showing Gabriel how lines of code could make machines move, how circuits processed information, how precision and creativity combined to create something greater than their parts. But more importantly, they started having dinner together every night. When Margaret came home from the hospital, the three of them, Adrian, Margaret and Gabriel, would sit around the kitchen table, talking about their days. Margaret's condition meant she had good days and bad days. On good days she was sharp and present, telling stories from her youth, asking Gabriel thoughtful questions about his life, treating him like the grandson she'd never had. On bad days she was confused, sometimes calling Gabriel by different names, sometimes forgetting he lived there, sometimes getting lost in her own house. But Gabriel learned to navigate both versions of Margaret, with patience and grace. "You remind me of someone," Margaret said one evening during a clear spell. They were sitting in the sunroom overlooking the harbor, the last light of day painting the water gold. "I can't quite remember who." "Maybe your son," Gabriel suggested. "When he was younger," Margaret shook her head. "No, not Adrian. Someone else. Someone who was lost once and found their way home." She looked at Gabriel with sudden intensity. "Do you know what I think about sometimes? That night you found me. I wasn't completely lost, Gabriel. Part of me knew I was outside. Part of me knew it was cold. Part of me knew I should go back inside." Gabriel frowned, confused. "I don't understand." "I was tired," Margaret said simply. "Tired of being confused. Tired of not recognizing my own son some days. Tired of losing myself piece by piece, like someone's erasing me from the inside out. And I thought," she trailed off, her eyes distant, "I thought maybe if I just stayed out there, if I just kept walking until I couldn't walk anymore, it would end peacefully, in the cold, just falling asleep and not waking up." "Margaret," Gabriel said, his heart breaking. "But then you came," Margaret continued, squeezing his hand. "This young man who had nothing, who was suffering himself, who was cold and hungry and homeless. And you didn't walk away. You stayed, you kept me warm, you kept me alive."
You talked to me for hours, telling me stories, asking me questions, keeping me present. She smiled, tears running down her wrinkled cheeks. You reminded me that life is worth living, even when it's hard, even when you're losing yourself, even when you're scared and confused, and don't know what tomorrow will bring. Because there are still people worth living for, still moments worth experiencing, still love worth holding on to. She touched his face gently with her other hand. You saved me in more ways than you know, Gabriel. And I want you to know something. I may not always remember your name tomorrow or next week. I may not always know who you are, or why you're here. But somewhere deep inside, in the place where the disease can't reach, I know you. And I love you like you're my own grandson. I love you too, Gabriel said, his voice breaking. I love you too, Margaret. They sat together in silence, watching the sunset paint the harbor in shades of gold and pink and violet. Two souls who'd found each other on the edge of darkness, and chosen to hold on. But before Adrian could seriously discuss Gabriel's future education, he said, they needed to deal with the legal issues. The next morning, Adrian took Gabriel to meet someone, Jennifer Vasquez, an immigration attorney who'd worked with Adrian's company on visa issues for international employees. Jennifer's office was in a renovated downtown building, all exposed brick and modern furniture. She greeted them warmly, shaking Gabriel's hand with a firm grip. Gabriel, she said, gesturing to a chair. Mr. Hale told me about your situation. I want to help. Over the next 2 hours, Gabriel told Jennifer everything. His mother's deportation when he was 15, his brother's disappearance, the 2 years surviving without documentation, without proof he even existed, the fear that had shaped every decision, every interaction, every moment of his life since he'd lost his family. Jennifer took notes, asked questions, and finally sat back with a thoughtful expression. This is complicated, she said carefully, but not impossible. You were brought here as a child, you had no choice in that. You've been here continuously for years. You've stayed out of legal trouble, despite having every reason to fall through the cracks. There are several provisions we can explore. She ticked them off on her fingers. DACA, deferred action for childhood arrivals. That's the most straightforward path. You meet the age requirements, you've been here long enough, and you have no criminal record. There's also special immigrant juvenile status, which applies to children who've been abandoned or abused. Given that your mother was deported and your brother disappeared, there's an argument to be made there. How long will it take? Gabriel asked, afraid to hope. Months probably. Immigration law moves slowly even in the best circumstances. And your case has some complications. No birth certificate, no passport, limited documentation proving your history. But Gabriel, Jennifer leaned forward. You deserve to exist legally in this country. You deserve documentation, opportunity, a real future. Let me help you get that. Gabriel felt something break open in his chest. Hope, yes, but also grief for all the years he'd spent invisible, for all the times he'd been afraid, for all the ways the system had failed him and his family. Thank you, he whispered. Don't thank me yet, Jennifer said with a small smile. We've got a lot of work ahead of us, but I promise you I'll fight for this. You deserve that fight.
Over the following weeks, Gabriel settled into a routine that felt almost surreal in its normalcy. Mornings were spent in the workshop with Adrian, learning programming and robotics. Adrian started with the basics: binary code, logic gates, simple algorithms, and gradually built up to more complex concepts. Gabriel discovered he had an aptitude for it, a way of thinking through problems that Adrian said was rare and valuable. You see patterns, Adrian told him one day as Gabriel debugged a particularly tricky piece of code. You see how things connect, how one change affects everything else. That's not something you can teach. You either have it or you don't. Afternoons were devoted to studying for his GED with a tutor. Adrian hired Mrs. Charlotte Davis, a retired teacher in her 60s with gray hair and bright, encouraging eyes. Mrs. Davis was patient but demanding. She pushed Gabriel to think critically, to question, to dig deeper. She helped him relearn math he'd forgotten, study science he'd never properly learned in his fractured education, understand history in context, rather than as disconnected facts. You're smart, Gabriel, she told him after he aced a practice test on American government. Smarter than you give yourself credit for. You're going to do great things. I can feel it." Gabriel wasn't sure about great things, but for the first time in 2 years he believed he might do something, might have a future beyond just surviving day to day. The immigration paperwork moved forward with frustrating slowness. Forms to fill out, documents to request from schools and hospitals and government agencies, appointments with Jennifer to review affidavits and prepare responses. It was bureaucratic and tedious and sometimes seemed hopeless. But Jennifer kept fighting, and Gabriel kept believing it would work out. Meanwhile, his education continued in unexpected ways. Gabriel spent evenings with Margaret, reading to her when she was calm, sitting with her when she was confused, helping her navigate the difficult terrain of her deteriorating mind. Some days Margaret was sharp, remembering everything, telling stories about Adrian as a boy, how he'd been obsessed with building things since he was 5, how he'd taken apart every appliance in the house to see how they worked, how his father Richard had encouraged his curiosity, even when it meant dealing with a broken toaster or dismantled radio. Other days Margaret was lost, asking for people long dead, unable to recognize the house she'd lived in for 5 years, frightened by her own confusion. On the bad days, Gabriel would sit with her in the sunroom. He'd read to her from the books she loved. Mysteries mostly, Agatha Christie and Dorothy Sayers and P.D. James. He'd show her the old photo albums, pointing out pictures and telling her stories about the moments captured there, even when she couldn't remember them herself. He'd hold her hand and tell her stories about his own mother, about his brother, about the life he'd lost, and somehow talking about his own pain seemed to calm her, to remind her that she wasn't alone in her suffering. Margaret seemed to respond to him in a way she didn't with the professional caregivers Adrian employed. Something about Gabriel's voice, his presence, his genuine care, broke through the confusion in a way that medical training couldn't replicate. "You have a gift," one of the caregivers told Gabriel. "She's calmer with you than with anyone else, even her own son sometimes." Gabriel didn't think of it as a gift, he just thought of it as kindness, as showing up, as being present for someone who needed him. The same things his mother had taught him. 6 weeks after Gabriel moved in, Adrian's carefully constructed world nearly fell apart. It started with a phone call on a Tuesday morning. Adrian was in the workshop with Gabriel, demonstrating a new suture algorithm for robotic surgery, when his phone rang. He glanced at the screen and frowned. "The board chairman," he said. "I should take this." He stepped outside and Gabriel watched through the workshop window as Adrian's expression changed from curious to shocked to pale. When Adrian came back in 5 minutes later, his hands were shaking. "What happened?" Gabriel asked, alarmed. Adrian ran a hand through his hair. "The board, they've called an emergency meeting for tomorrow. Someone leaked to the press that I took in a homeless teenager I found with my mother. There's an article in the business section questioning my judgment. They're saying it's a liability, that I'm not thinking clearly, that grief over my mother's condition and my wife's death is affecting my ability to lead the company." Gabriel felt his stomach drop. "This is my fault." "No," Adrian said sharply. "This is not your fault. This is corporate politics and people who can't understand doing something because it's right instead of because it's profitable." But Gabriel could see the worry in Adrian's eyes. The company Adrian had built from nothing was being threatened because he'd chosen to help. The emergency board meeting was scheduled for 2 o'clock the next afternoon. Adrian barely slept that night. Gabriel heard him pacing in his office until 3 in the morning, heard the low murmur of phone calls, the click of laptop keys. The next afternoon, Adrian went to the board meeting alone. He wore his best suit, his expression grim and determined. Gabriel waited at the house, sick with anxiety. He paced the studio apartment, tried to study but couldn't focus. Stood at the window overlooking the harbor, watching boats drift by, imagining worst-case scenarios. This was exactly what he'd feared from the beginning, that his presence would destroy everything Adrian had built, that helping him would cost Adrian everything. 3 hours later, Adrian returned. His tie was loosened, his face drawn and exhausted, but there was something else in his expression too. Something fierce and unrepentant. "What happened?" Gabriel asked as Adrian poured himself a whiskey. Adrian took a long drink before answering. "They gave me an ultimatum. Either you leave or they start proceedings to remove me as CEO. They said housing you is a reckless decision that exposes the company to legal liability. They said I'm not thinking clearly, that I'm being taken advantage of by someone who saw an opportunity." His voice was bitter. "They actually used the phrase questionable judgment." Gabriel felt tears sting his eyes. I'll pack my things. No, Adrian said firmly, setting down his glass. You're not going anywhere, but your company, I told them. Adrian interrupted, his voice gaining strength, that my mother was dying of dementia while I was too busy building robots to spend time with her. I told them that a 17-year-old kid with nothing risked his life to save her while I was 3 hours away at a research facility, too focused on the next innovation to notice the people who actually mattered. He met Gabriel's eyes. I told them that this reckless decisions taught me more about what matters in life than 20 years of business school and board meetings ever did. I told them that if they want me out, they can vote, but they should know that I'll fight them every step of the way. And if they succeed in removing me, I'll take my patents, my designs, my research, and my reputation, and I'll start over somewhere else. With Gabriel stared at him, unable to speak. You'd give up everything you built, he finally managed. I already lost everything that mattered once, Adrian said quietly. When Sarah died, when I let work consume me instead of being there for her in her final months. When I hired caregivers for my mother, instead of being present myself, I'm not making that mistake again. He took another drink. Your family now, Gabriel. And I don't abandon family for a board of directors who've never saved anyone's life. What did they say? Adrian smiled grimly. They tabled the discussion. Which means they're scared, they know I'm serious. And they know that if they push this, the press will have a field day. Wealthy tech CEO kicked out for helping homeless teen who saved his mother's life. It's not exactly great optics. So what happens now? Now we keep living our lives, Adrian said. And if they come at me again, we deal with it then, together. But the press had already gotten the story, and it spread faster than either of them anticipated. The next morning, reporters were camped outside the house. Camera crews with their satellite trucks, journalists shouting questions whenever anyone came in or out, helicopters circling overhead for aerial shots. Gabriel stayed inside, terrified. He'd spent 2 years trying to be invisible, and now his face was going to be on the news. Adrian stepped outside to make a statement. Gabriel watched from the window, his stomach churning. Yes, Gabriel Russo is living with my family, Adrian told the assembled reporters, his voice calm and firm. He saved my mother's life at great personal risk, giving up everything he had to keep her alive in a storm that nearly killed them both. Offering him a home isn't charity, it's basic human decency. If my board of directors has a problem with that, they're welcome to explain to the public why a billion-dollar medical technology company thinks kindness is a liability. The reporters erupted with questions, shouting over each other. Is it true he's undocumented? Did you do a background check? Are you concerned about legal liability? What do you say to critics who claim this is just a publicity stunt? Adrian held up a hand. I'm not answering individual questions. I'll just say this. Gabriel Russo showed more courage and compassion in 5 hours than most of us show in a lifetime. He deserves a chance to build a life, and if people have a problem with that, that says more about them than it does about him. He went back inside without another word. That should keep them busy, he said. Though his hands were still shaking slightly, the story exploded. Within 24 hours, it was national news. Cable channels running segments, social media buzzing with opinions, think pieces being written about immigration, homelessness, corporate responsibility, and the nature of heroism. Most of the coverage was positive, heartwarming story of gratitude and second chances, the power of kindness, a reminder of our shared humanity. Gabriel's story resonated with people: the immigrant child who lost everything, the teenage years of survival, the impossible choice to help a stranger, even when it cost him everything. Though there were critics too, people who questioned Adrian's judgment, calling him naive or reckless, people who suggested Gabriel was manipulating the situation, playing on emotions to take advantage of a grieving widower, people who couldn't imagine that a homeless teenager might genuinely deserve help without having some hidden agenda. Talk radio hosts debated whether Adrian was being foolish. Online commenters dissected Gabriel's story looking for inconsistencies. A few news outlets even tracked down people who'd known Gabriel before, trying to find some dark secret or evidence of wrongdoing. They found nothing. Just a quiet kid who'd survived impossible circumstances with his dignity intact. But the scrutiny was overwhelming. Gabriel hated it, hated being in the spotlight. Hated having his life dissected by strangers who'd never spent a night cold and hungry.
who'd never had to choose between helping someone and protecting themselves. "I never wanted this," he told Adrian one night after a particularly brutal day of media coverage. "I just wanted to help your mother. I didn't want to be some symbol or story or debate." "I know," Adrian said gently, "but sometimes doing the right thing gets messy. The important thing is we stick together. We don't let them make you into whatever narrative they want. You're not a symbol, you're a person. And we protect that." After 2 brutal weeks, the media frenzy finally began to die down. A political scandal in Washington captured the news cycle. A natural disaster overseas pulled focus. The reporters left. The camera crews moved on to the next story. The board backed off their ultimatum, clearly deciding that removing Adrian would create more problems than it solved. And life slowly, tentatively returned to some version of normal, or at least the new normal they were building together. 3 months after Gabriel moved in, on a quiet morning in early summer, Margaret passed away in her sleep. Adrian found her at dawn when he went to check on her. She was lying peacefully in her bed, her hands folded over her chest, a small smile on her face. For once she looked completely at peace, all confusion and fear finally gone. The doctor said it was a massive stroke, sudden and merciless. She wouldn't have felt pain, wouldn't have been afraid. She'd simply gone to sleep and never woken up. Gabriel took the news like a physical blow. He'd only known Margaret for 3 months, but she'd become the grandmother he'd never really had, the family he'd lost. The funeral was large. Hundreds of people whose lives Margaret had touched over her 72 years, friends from her youth, people from the community, former colleagues of Richard's who still remembered her kindness, Adrian's business associates paying respects, and a surprising number of people who'd read about Gabriel's story and come to honor the woman whose wandering had led to such an unlikely family. But the moment Gabriel would always remember was standing at the graveside after everyone else had left, Adrian beside him saying goodbye to the woman who'd given him a family when he had nothing. The headstone was simple, elegant: Margaret Rose Hale, beloved wife, mother and grandmother. She taught us that home is where someone waits for you. After Adrian left to speak with the funeral director about final arrangements, Gabriel stayed. He pulled out the cassette player from his backpack. He'd finally bought batteries for it with money from his first paycheck, doing odd jobs around the workshop, and pressed play. His mother's favorite song filled the quiet cemetery, a Spanish ballad about love and loss, and finding your way home. When it finished, Adrian was standing behind him. Gabriel hadn't heard him return. Tears were streaming down both their faces. "That was beautiful," Adrian whispered. "She deserved beautiful," Gabriel said. They stood together in silence, 2 men bound by loss and love and the strange, impossible grace of the night that had brought them together. After Margaret's death, the house felt too big and too quiet. Adrian threw himself into work with an intensity that worried Gabriel. Not the obsessive avoidance he'd practiced before, but something different, a focused determination to build something meaningful from the loss. "I'm starting a foundation," he told Gabriel one evening over dinner. They were eating in the kitchen now, just the 2 of them, the formal dining room feeling too empty without Margaret. "The Margaret Hale Foundation for Homeless Youth. It'll provide housing, education support, job training, mental health services, and legal assistance for young people aging out of foster care or living on the streets." He looked at Gabriel. "I want you to be involved, not just as inspiration but as a real voice. Your perspective, your lived experience, it's invaluable. Would you consider joining the advisory board?" Gabriel felt overwhelmed. "I'm just a kid, I don't know anything about running a foundation." "You know the most important thing," Adrian said. "You know what it's like. You understand it in a way I never could, no matter how much research I do or how many reports I read. You know what these kids need, because you were one of them. That's exactly what we need." So Gabriel joined the board. At 17, by far the youngest member, he sat in meetings with business people and philanthropists and non-profit directors and social workers, people with decades of experience, and told them hard truths they needed to hear. "It's not enough to give people a bed for the night," Gabriel said at one early board meeting, his voice quiet but firm. "They need dignity. They need to be seen as people, not problems or statistics. They need structure, yes, but also freedom. They need support, but also the space to make their own choices and their own mistakes. and most of all they need someone to believe in them when they've stopped believing in themselves. The room had gone quiet, listening. When you're homeless, Gabriel continued, especially when you're young, the world treats you like you're invisible, or worse, like you're dangerous, like you're a threat. People cross the street to avoid you, they look through you like you don't exist. And after a while, you start to believe it. You start to think maybe you don't matter, maybe you don't deserve better. He met their eyes. So if this foundation is going to work, if it's really going to help, it has to do more than provide services. It has to see people. It has to treat every kid who walks through the door like they matter, like they're worthy of respect and care and opportunity, because they are. When he finished there was a moment of silence, then the woman across from him, a veteran social worker named Patricia Rodriguez, smiled. "You're going to be good at this," she said. The Margaret Hale Foundation launched 4 months later with a pilot shelter specifically designed for young adults ages 18 to 24. Not just beds and meals but wraparound services, education support, job training, mental health counseling, life skills classes, legal aid, and most importantly staff who genuinely cared. They renovated an old apartment building near the waterfront, creating private rooms instead of dormitory-style cots. Each resident got their own key, their own space, their own dignity. Gabriel volunteered there 3 times a week, even as he continued his education and worked in Adrian's workshop. He couldn't stay away. These were his people. One evening in early fall, Gabriel was working the dinner shift when a kid came in, maybe 16, thin and weary, wearing clothes too light for the autumn chill, with eyes that had seen too much too young. The kid reminded Gabriel of himself 2 years ago. "First time here?" Gabriel asked gently, keeping his voice low and non-threatening. The kid nodded, not meeting his eyes, shoulders hunched defensively. "I'm Gabriel, want some food? We've got chicken and rice tonight. Real food, not just soup." The kid's stomach growled audibly, betraying his hunger despite his attempt to seem unaffected. "Yeah, okay." Gabriel got him a tray loaded with food, chicken, rice, vegetables, salad, bread and apple pie. More food than one person should reasonably eat. The kid stared at it like it might disappear if he looked away. "It's yours," Gabriel said, sitting down across from him. "All of it. Take your time. Nobody's going to rush you or take it away." As the kid ate like he was starving, which he probably was, Gabriel just sat quietly, giving him space. After a few minutes, the kid looked up. "You work here?" "I volunteer," Gabriel said. 3 nights a week. "Why?" Gabriel smiled sadly. "Because I was you. 2 years ago, I was exactly where you are. Homeless, scared, alone, not sure I was going to survive another winter." The kid studied him skeptically. "You don't look homeless." "I'm not anymore, but I was, for 2 years. Slept in shelters when I could get in, on beaches when I couldn't, under piers when the weather was really bad." He paused. "I know how hard it is, how scary, how exhausting, how every single day is just about surviving until tomorrow." The kid's defensive posture softened slightly. "How'd you get out?" So Gabriel told him. Not the sanitized version that appeared in news articles or fundraising materials, the real version. The fear and hunger and cold, the constant danger, the small acts of kindness that kept him going. The impossible choice to help an old woman even when it cost him everything. The family he'd found because of one freezing night. "The thing is," Gabriel said, "I didn't know that night would change my life. I just knew someone needed help, and I was there. Sometimes that's all it takes. Being there, being willing, being kind even when it's hard." The kid was quiet for a long time, absorbing this. Finally, "Can I stay here tonight?" "Absolutely," Gabriel said. "And tomorrow if you want, we can talk about next steps, school, job training, legal help if you need it. Whatever you need, but tonight, you just rest. You're safe here." The kid's eyes filled with tears. "I've been alone for so long." "I know," Gabriel said, his own throat tight with remembered pain. "I know exactly how that feels, but not anymore. We've got you now. You're not alone."
Jennifer Vasquez called on a Tuesday afternoon in late September with news that made Gabriel's hands shake so badly, he almost dropped the phone. "Your application for special immigrant juvenile status has been approved," she said, her voice warm with triumph. "You're going to get your green card, Gabriel. You're going to be legal." Gabriel sat down hard in Adrian's workshop, unable to speak, unable to breathe. Gabriel, Jennifer's voice came through the phone. Are you there? I'm here, Gabriel managed, his voice breaking. I can't believe it. Believe it, Jennifer said firmly. You deserve this. You've always deserved this. Now the system is finally recognizing it. When Gabriel told Adrian, the older man pulled him into a tight hug, something they'd started doing, this physical affirmation of family. I'm so proud of you, Adrian said, his voice thick with emotion. So incredibly proud. You did this, Gabriel. You fought for this. We did it, Gabriel corrected. You and Jennifer and everyone who helped. I couldn't have done this alone, maybe, Adrian said. But you're the one who had the courage to try, who kept going even when it seemed impossible. That's all you. With legal status came possibilities Gabriel had never dared to imagine. He could work legally now, could go to school without fear, could get a driver's license, could open a bank account, could build a real life instead of just surviving day to day, could exist officially in the world. Adrian helped him enroll in community college that winter. Gabriel chose psychology as his major, with a focus on trauma and adolescent development. He wanted to help kids like himself, kids who'd fallen through the cracks, kids who needed someone to see them. His first class was Introduction to Psychology, taught by Dr. Elizabeth Chen, a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and an even sharper mind. After the third class, she asked Gabriel to stay behind. I read your admissions essay, Dr. Chen said, settling into the chair beside him rather than maintaining the traditional teacher-student distance of standing while he sat. About being homeless, about saving Margaret Hale, about everything that came after. Gabriel tensed, waiting for judgment, or pity, or the invasive questions he'd learned to expect. I was homeless too, Dr. Chen said quietly, when I was 19. My parents kicked me out when they found out I was gay. I lived in my car for almost a year, showering at the university gym, doing my homework in coffee shops, pretending everything was fine. She smiled, and Gabriel saw understanding in her eyes, the kind that only comes from shared experience. Someone helped me. A professor who saw me sleeping in the library one night and refused to look away. She helped me find housing, helped me apply for emergency scholarships, helped me build a life. She saw me when I felt invisible. Dr. Chen leaned forward. You have a gift, Gabriel. The ability to see pain in others because you felt it yourself. That empathy born from lived experience is what makes truly great therapists and social workers and advocates. Don't waste it. Don't let anyone convince you that your past is something to overcome or move beyond. It's your strength. I want to help people, Gabriel said. Kids especially. I want to be the person who doesn't walk away. Then you're in exactly the right place, Dr. Chen said, and I'm going to push you hard. Not because I doubt you, but because I know what you're capable of. Deal? Deal? Gabriel said. 3 years passed in a rhythm of growth and healing. Gabriel threw himself into his studies with an intensity that surprised even him. He was always the first one in class, the last one to leave. He read every assignment twice, participated in every discussion, volunteered for every project. He maintained a 4.0 GPA while working part-time at the foundation and helping Adrian in the workshop. He graduated from community college with highest honors and transferred to the state university. He continued working at the foundation, transitioning from volunteer to paid staff member, eventually becoming the coordinator of youth services. He found an apartment of his own in his junior year, a small studio near campus, but still spent most evenings at Adrian's house, eating dinner, talking about their days, maintaining the connection they'd built. Because Adrian wasn't just the man who'd given him a home anymore, he was family. Father in every way that mattered. On the 5th anniversary of the night Gabriel found Margaret, the foundation held a gala fundraiser, 5 years of operation. Over 800 young people helped, dozens of success stories, lives transformed. Gabriel was invited to speak. He stood at the podium in a suit Adrian had helped him pick out, looking out at 200 faces, donors, board members, community leaders, staff and young people whose lives had been changed by the foundation's work. His hands shook slightly as he gripped the podium. Public speaking still terrified him. But this was important. 5 years ago tonight, Gabriel began, his voice finding strength as he spoke. I was 17 years old and homeless. I had $11 in my pocket and nowhere to go. The shelters were full. The temperature was dropping. A storm was coming. I was nobody. I was invisible. He paused, letting that sink in. And then I heard someone crying. An elderly woman, lost and confused and barefoot in the cold. And I had a choice. I could keep walking, keep myself safe, focus on my own survival. Or I could stay. I could help. I could risk everything for a stranger. Gabriel looked at Adrian sitting in the front row with tears already shining in his eyes. I chose to stay, and that choice changed everything. His voice grew stronger, more confident. But here's what I've learned in 5 years of doing this work. 5 years of being part of this foundation. 5 years of seeing other people make the same choice. That moment I had, that choice, it's not unique to me, it's the choice we all face. Every single day. When we see someone struggling, someone in pain, someone who's been made invisible by society, we can walk away, or we can stay. We can protect ourselves, or we can reach out. We can hoard our resources, or we can share them. He looked around the room at all the faces, some he knew, some he didn't, all of them here because they'd made the choice to care. My mother used to tell me, before she was deported, before I lost everything, that you're never poor if you still have kindness to give. She was right. Kindness is the one thing that costs us something, and yet makes us richer. It's the one thing we can give away without losing. It's the thing that connects us, that reminds us we're human, that makes life worth living, even when things are hard. Gabriel's voice cracked with emotion. Margaret Hale understood that. She spent her whole life giving her time, her love, her resources, her compassion. And even in her final years when dementia was stealing her mind piece by piece, she taught us one last lesson. She taught us that being seen, being valued, being loved, that's what makes us human. That's what saves us. He wiped his eyes, not caring that 200 people were watching him cry. This foundation exists because of one cold night and one impossible choice. But it continues to exist because of all of you. Because you've made the same choice, to see people who are invisible. To stay when it would be easier to walk away. To believe that every single person, no matter where they come from, what they look like, whether they have papers or money or family, every single person matters. Every single person deserves a chance. His final words came out as barely more than a whisper, but in the silent room, everyone heard. Thank you for believing in this work. Thank you for believing in these young people, and thank you for proving, every single day, that kindness changes everything. The room erupted in applause. People stood, clapping, some crying. Gabriel saw familiar faces, the kid from the shelter 3 years ago, now in college, now thriving, now volunteering to help others. Dr. Chen from the university, beaming with pride. Jennifer Vasquez, who'd fought so hard for his legal status. Patricia Rodriguez, and the other board members, and dozens of young people whose lives had been touched by the foundation, by the choice to stay, by the radical act of believing they mattered. After the speeches, after the dinner, after the donors had written their checks and the crowd had thinned, Gabriel found himself outside on the harbor walk. The night was clear, stars bright overhead despite the city lights. The water lapped gently against the pier where 5 years ago he'd nearly died. He stood there, looking out at the dark water, thinking about that night. About Margaret's confusion and fear, about the cold that had seeped into his bones, about the choice he'd made, not knowing it would lead here. He heard footsteps behind him, and turned to find Adrian approaching. Hell of a speech, Adrian said, coming to stand beside him at the railing. Meant every word, Gabriel replied. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the lights reflect on the dark water, listening to the gentle sounds of the harbor at night. You know what Margaret said to me? Adrian asked finally. A few days before she died, during one of her last clear moments, Gabriel shook his head, turning to look at him. She said, Gabriel didn't just save my life, Adrian. He saved all of us. He reminded us what love looks like. Adrian's voice broke. She was right. You did save us, all of us. You showed us what it means to be human. Gabriel felt tears streaming down his face. You saved me too, you and Margaret. You gave me everything. A home, a family, an education, a future. You believed in me when I'd stopped believing in myself. No, Adrian said firmly, turning to face him fully. You earned everything. Every opportunity, every achievement, every moment of happiness. You earned it by being exactly who you are. Kind, brave, relentlessly compassionate, even when the world wasn't compassionate, back. He put both hands on Gabriel's shoulders, looking him directly in the eyes. I'm proud of you, son.
More proud than I can say, and your mother wherever she is, I know she's proud too. You kept your promise to her, you stayed kind. Son, Gabriel repeated, the words settling into his heart like coming home. I like that. Good, Adrian said, pulling him into a hug. Because that's what you are, my son. In every way that matters. They stood there for a long time, holding on to each other, two men who'd found each other on the worst night of their lives and built something beautiful from the wreckage. A family, a purpose, a life worth living. The harbor lights twinkled on the water, the city hummed with nighttime energy around them. And Gabriel Russo, no longer homeless, no longer invisible, no longer alone, felt something he'd spent years believing was impossible. Complete, safe, home. Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.